today reflects many changes based on suggestions made during and since our legislative hearing. I want to thank you all for the input over the past few weeks. While every section of the bill has seen some changes, two highlights are the inclusion of an extension of the fee that funds reclamation of abandoned mine lands and increased funding for Western water infrastructure. With those modifications, the bill before us would authorize approximately $98 billion to invest in the reliability and resilience of our electric grid and expand transmission, demonstrate the energy technologies that we need deployed, build out our domestic supply chains for clean energy technologies, from the sourcing of minerals to recycling of batteries, clean up abandoned energy infrastructure that powered our country to greatness while also reducing methane emissions, and invest in water infrastructure needed by Western states, restore ecosystems, and mitigate wildfire risk. Wildfires are raging across the country, and it's important to both this committee and the Senate Agriculture Committee, with whom we have often overlapping jurisdiction on these issues, that we get legislation enacted quickly to help address them. This package also not only includes provisions that have enjoyed strong bipartisan support in this committee in bills like the SCALE Act for carbon capture, CO2 infrastructure, and the ReGrow Act to cap orphan wells, which have been championed by my colleagues around the room. But it also delivers on President Biden's American Jobs Plan in many big ways and has earned the support of a wide swath of stakeholders. There are several amendments that we have been able to accept in a manager's package and several others that we will be discussing and voting on today. Once we have processed any amendments that are called up, I will urge you all to support this robust infrastructure package. It is important to all of our states that infrastructure does not overlook needed investment in the energy sector, Western water, wildfires, and public lands. With that, I'll turn to Ranking Member Barrasso for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding today's business meeting. I appreciate your willingness to bring infrastructure legislation before this committee. I'm also grateful to you for making improvements to the bill. Thank you for including our compromise on reauthorizing the abandoned mine land reclamation fee and for meeting me partway on rural water storage for the West. I appreciate the improvements, yet in its current form, I at this point cannot support the legislation. The bill includes $95 billion in new spending authorizations. We're told that prior to floor consideration, Majority Leader Schumer is going to turn these authorizations into mandatory appropriations. So it's still unclear now how the majority is going to pay for this new spending. It has been widely reported they intend to dramatically increase the size of the Internal Revenue Service to raise added revenue, and I strongly oppose supersizing the IRS. A dramatically expanded IRS is going to target small business owners and family farms, and we don't have armies of tax lawyers and accountants to defend themselves against overly aggressive tax collectors. I'm concerned that this bill paves the way for the Biden administration to take over America's electric system. President Biden has pledged to establish a carbon-free power sector for the entire nation by the year 2035. Now, this is 10 years earlier than the goal that the state of California has set for itself. California already has among the highest electricity prices in the nation. It has experienced rolling blackouts over the last 2 years, and California is the last state that the Biden administration should mandate as a model for the rest of our nation. To that end, the bill would empower the federal government to override states' decisions on the siting of high-voltage electric transmission lines. Last week, the president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners wrote to this committee saying, "This new provision simply gives the state an ultimatum. Approve the project or FERC will approve it for you." At a minimum, a change to this significance should be subject of its own hearing before this committee. This bill also gives the federal government the authority to buy electric transmission capacity. There's no shortage of private sector investment in transmission capacity. There's no reason to make the federal government a transmission buyer or seller. The bill also enables the Biden administration and its political allies to pressure states to adopt building codes that restrict or ban the use of natural gas in homes and commercial buildings. Prohibiting Americans from heating their homes with natural gas is bad policy. It is less energy efficient, more harmful to the environment, and more expensive for consumers. The legislation includes insufficient permitting reform for critical minerals. The Biden administration wants to end the sale of new vehicles with internal combustion engines. If we don't increase mining here in the United States, we will undermine our hard-won energy independence. We will only become more dependent on China, and we cannot let that happen. So finally, I believe more needs to be done for water in the West. If any projects within the committee's jurisdiction meet the definition of infrastructure, they are Bureau of Reclamation projects. Farmers and ranchers depend on water supply and storage facilities to grow crops and to raise livestock. This bill fails to reauthorize expiring programs and fails to address existing reservoirs at our aging facilities. This is a missed opportunity, especially for the drought conditions in the West. While ultimately I can't support this legislation, I do appreciate the Chairman bringing the bill before the committee for its consideration, and I again thank Chairman Manchin for working with me to improve those provisions on which we could find common ground. I look forward to continuing to work with the Chairman of the committee and the opportunity to further improve this legislation.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. We'll turn now to the bill. We're meeting to consider an agenda item 1, an original bill to invest in the energy and outdoor infrastructure of the United States. The short list was circulated and is on the dais in front of each member. As a housekeeping matter, we will be processing amendments by title. If my colleagues wish to call up an amendment, they'll need to be here to do so in the appropriate title. As a reminder, we need a working quorum of 7 members to vote on amendments. We had 181 amendments filed. I know there is interest in voting on several of them. So we will plan to discuss and process amendments in an orderly and expeditious manner. I appreciate the cooperation of all members to do so. I know schedules are tight. First, we'll begin by adopting amendments that have been cleared by joint staff. We do have at least 7 members present, so we'll move to consideration of amendments. We'll move to accept amendments in block, which were filed by members and have been cleared by joint staff for agenda item 1. King's amendments 2, 4, and 16. Cortez Masto's amendments 22, 23, 25, 63. Hirono's amendment 26. Cantwell's amendments 27, 29. The amendments I have are based on technical cleanups 31 through 36 and 65, 66 and 67. I know this sounds like a lot of my amendments, but they are all technical fixes or non-controversial edits and have been negotiated.
Senator, excuse me. Senator, did you say 31 or 30? Did you begin with 30?
30, 31.
Okay.
32, 3, 4, 35, 36, 65, 66, 67.
Thank you.
That's correct?
That's correct.
Those are all
And 65 and 67 are as modified.
Modified,
Yes.
correct.
Thank you.
Heinrich's amendment 38 as modified. Murkowski's amendment 11. Barrasso's amendment 74, 79, 80, 94, 81 is modified, and 174. Rish's amendments 12 and 73. Cassidy's amendments 122, 124, and 123 is modified. Dane's amendments as modified 103, 106, 111, as amended by Dane's second degree amendment 3, and 112 is modified. If there are no objections to the committee, will voice vote in block the amendments I've just listed. Are there any objections? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. Now we will move to consideration of amendments members would like to raise in Title I, Grid Infrastructure and Resiliency. Would any members like to be recognized to offer an amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Wyden.
I believe on your list it's called Wyden 14, the Disaster Safe Power Grid. Would you like me to explain it, Mr. Chairman?
Please do, Senator.
Mr. Chairman and colleagues, Senator Cantwell knows this is very well as well. Last week in the Northwest, our papers carried headlines like, Northwest heat melts the power cables. And now in this legislation, we have a chance to respond. And not with a big government solution, colleagues. Private sector working with government at every level. Every level. So you have private sector, local government, state government, federal government. And Senator Manchin, and I thank him for this, worked to include our underlying proposal to have this kind of partnership so that we won't have our power cables melting. And for those colleagues that didn't follow it, in the Pacific Northwest, we had 3 days in a row where we broke the heat records. In other words, we went from something like 110 the day I got home for the break to 112, and then on Monday, we were at 116. And to give colleagues an idea what it was like, you know, we're very proud of all our track fields in Eugene. We were hosting the Olympic trials. They had to cancel the trial at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because it was so hot. And up in the booth, and I'm still trying to get the details of it, apparently like one runner got burned when they put their leg on the track. I've got to confirm that. But you get an idea that that was what the heat was like. And this amendment, simple tweak, so that our utilities, as they're repairing the power cables melting as a result of this record-setting heat, could work with all the governmental bodies, but particularly both the Department of Energy and state governments on projects that would reduce the risk to our cables and letting the utilities work with all of the various bodies. Mr. Chairman, I think this is a really modest tweak. Senator Barrasso, I talked with Senator Barrasso about it. I think this is a tiny tweak to what we have in the law.
Let me speak to my colleagues on that, if I may. This amendment prevents double dipping, so an entity can take advantage of 2 different grant programs for the same project, but it clarifies that the entity may still submit for consideration applications for more than one project during the grant cycle. It really, the amendment maintains the original intention of the provision. It amends and makes a helpful technical fix. So I do recommend, and hopefully that maybe we can have a voice vote on this. Senator Barrasso.
Mr. Chairman, I just visited with the senator from Oregon about that. I'm concerned, not with Oregon, but I'm concerned that this is going to result in California utilities drawing too much money from this underlying program. So if we go to the floor and may come up with an amendment at this time, but at this point, I'm a no vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that,
I'd call the roll. And colleagues, again, I want to work with all of you. Senator Barrasso, if you're voting no today and you want to work on the floor, I'll continue to do it. But colleagues, and Senator Manchin and I have talked about this. When you see the kind of heat harm that we saw last week, I mean, our region just got hit by a wrecking ball, colleagues. Senator Cassidy and I have talked about this. You know, my background's working with the elderly as director of the Great Panthers. The senior citizens, for example, they owned their house. They had a little bit of wealth, but they had no air conditioning. And so they would go to these cooling centers because they came up to me and said, Ron, if I get stuck in my house, I'm not going to be able to breathe. So we are dealing with unprecedented challenges with respect to this heat. And when your power cables are melting, that's not a Democratic issue. That's not a Republican issue. I hope all my colleagues who can will support it. And I want to again thank Senator Manchin. He knows I'm going to be working with him through the whole process on the Finance Committee. We've got many members of the Finance Committee here. I consider Senator Manchin, he's been working with us. This is a start. But, boy, when you have your power cables melting, we got to do something about it. So I'm ready to vote, Mr. Chairman.
the question is on the adoption of amendment number 14 offered by Senator Wyden. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Manchin.
Aye.
Senator Wyden.
Aye.
Senator Cantwell.
Aye.
Senator Sanders.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Heinrich. Senator Hirono. Senator King. Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Kelly. Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Barrasso.
No.
Senator Risch.
No by proxy.
Senator Lee. Senator Daines. Senator Murkowski. Senator Hoeven. Senator Lankford. Senator Cassidy. Senator Hyde-Smith. Senator Marshall. On this vote, the ayes are 10 and the noes are 10.
Not the Energy Committee we want. Not the future of the Energy Committee we want.
The vote.
The ayes are 10, the noes are 10, so the amendment fails on a tie.
Are there any other amendments on Title I that,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, Senator King?
I'd like to call up King Amendment number one. The first thing I'd like to say is that in my experience, messy structure creates messy policy. And there are various authorities and powers scattered in the Department of Energy with regard to grid deployment and the development of the national grid. My amendment does not create any new powers or authorities in the department. It simply creates a grid deployment authority within the Department of Energy to bring all of these powers and authorities into the same facility. We're talking about trying to modernize the 21st century grid. There are states, Kansas, for example, Oklahoma, for example, that have tremendous resources in wind and other forms of power. We have consumer areas of the country that can't get at those energy sources because of the lack of transmission. And by linking together transmission planning and strengthening the connection between the eastern and western interconnections, this grid development authority that I'm proposing can help drive investment to areas with the greatest potential. It will facilitate financing of infrastructure that typically faces significant construction and market risk, coordinate the siting, permitting, and environmental analysis for transmission projects, leading to accelerated project deployments. I want to emphasize, this does not give the Department of Energy any new authorities or powers. It simply brings the Department of Energy's existing authorities and the new authorities we're giving the Secretary in the bill into a single office so that they can be brought to bear in a consistent and coordinated way. It is my understanding that the Secretary has the authority under the Energy Organization Act to create something like what we're proposing here, but if it's done within a statutory framework, it retains the authority of this committee and the Congress over this organizational change in the Department of Energy. So, simple amendment, simply trying to create a more consistent and coordinated structure within the Department of Energy to deal with grid modernization efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The amendment consolidates existing authorities and new authorities created in this legislation within a new grid development authority. It gives a single office the clear mission to deploy new transmission technologies and make our grid more reliable and resilient. I do support it, and I would urge all my colleagues to do the same. Is there any other discussion on these?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, to me, this amendment seeks to give the Department of Energy authority that it already has, and for that reason, I cannot support it.
I'm unclear on that.
Any discussion?
Why would one object to giving someone authority they already have? It simply rationalizes the organizational structure.
Other discussions on the amendment? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? No. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Amendment passes.
Roll call.
Mr. Chairman?
We're going to have a division on that. I mean, it seems pretty clear that.
I didn't hear roll call, so I figured we were going to roll with it. We were on a roll there, brother. Have a roll call. Questions on adoption of amendment number 1 offered by Senator King. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Manchin.
Aye.
Mr. Wyden.
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Sanders.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Hirono. Mr. King. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Barrasso.
No.
Mr. Risch.
No by proxy.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Daines. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Lankford. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Hyde-Smith.
Not starting out good.
Mr. Marshall.
He's going to get back.
On this vote, the ayes are 10 and the noes are 10. and the amendment fails on a tie.
Amendment is not agreed to. Is there other amendments, Title I?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rono.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Section 1003D in the base bill takes the important step of directing the Secretary of Energy to collaborate with the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and interested energy infrastructure stakeholders to develop tools and measures to assess the resilience, reliability, safety, and security of our country's energy infrastructure. This is in the base bill. It's a good thing. My amendment would do two things. First, it would require the assessment to factor in the current and future impacts of climate change. For example, it would be worth considering whether electric power transformers, pipelines, or refineries are going to be vulnerable to sea level rise or especially at risk from wildfires. The amendment, secondly, specifies that the Secretary may collaborate with academic and the private sector in developing tools necessary to assess the security and resilience of our energy infrastructure. So these are the two additions to make sure that the Department of Energy is using the best available information to assess the security of our energy infrastructure. I'd ask my colleagues to vote for this amendment.
This is on Senator Rono's number 56.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right, number
Amendment
56. So we'll make
56.
sure everybody has the right amendment. It simply clarifies the analytical framework the Secretary of Energy is directed to develop. Would also use data of anticipated changes in climate patterns and future vulnerabilities that could rise to extreme weather events, which we're seeing all over our country. It also clarifies the department is able to work with academia and private sector stakeholders and on climate forecasting. And I think it's a very common sense, allowing us to look at the devastating effects we're having with the climate right now. So with that, I urge all support of that. Any other?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the amendment's unnecessary. Any resiliency framework includes all hazards, including the climate, so I'm going to be a no vote.
Any other discussion on the amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
No.
Before I call this one again on the ayes, do you want to ask for the?
Well, if you say it's a division, and we'll just move on to the next item, but it's not going to be. You don't have to take a roll call on each one. We didn't hear any ayes from the
I keep listening. Sometimes I hear that yes on my left here, and I just keep thinking that there's someone over whispering to me. With that, there's a division on that. With that, we'll move on to the next amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Could I submit Marshall Amendment number 39 for consideration, the repeal federal backstop authority for interstate electric transmission lines?
Number 39, Marshall Amendment.
Yes.
You want to explain?
You bet. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to sincerely thank you and your team for all the hard work they've done to strengthen our national electric grids. Nevertheless, our amendment, Marshall Amendment 39, would strike a particularly concerning position, Section 1005. In effect, this section would require states to approve siting of high-voltage interstate transmission lines within 1 year of an application being filed. If for any reason a state should choose another outcome, Ferc would be given the authority to issue the permit, even overriding legitimate concerns expressed at the state level. And to that end, I'd like to submit a letter for the record from the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners supporting our position of repealing Section 1005. That's
without yes.
Without objection. Thank you. While I share a goal of providing more certainty in this process, the primary role of our state public service commissions is to maintain utility services and ensure they are provided reasonably and fairly. This amendment would harm the state's ability to carry out their mission by stripping them of their authority for siting and substituting federal eminent domain. For Kansans, more transmission lines across our land could lead to the establishment of more wind farms in areas of our state that don't want to see new turbines. It could also cause Kansas to bear a significant portion of the transmission costs for the export of wind energy produced in our state. And before I go further, I just want to say I'm proud of what Kansas has done. 40% of the electricity generated in Kansas is from wind, 33% from coal, and about 18% from nuclear. But the problem is every time we add wind energy or solar energy, our local utility rates are going up despite transporting a significant amount of that energy out of the state. Moreover, as one of my constituents, a close friend, expressed to me recently, at least under the current structure, our state regulatory body is able to take into consideration the issues that are important to Kansans or West Virginians or Maine folks and make decisions that are more reflective of those issues. If Section 1005 were enacted, we would no longer be able to make our case to the state agency, and to quote her, Ferc would have de facto authority to approve all projects, robbing us of our ability to even attempt to make our voices heard. In closing, Section 1005 represents a major change from current law that could seriously undermine property rights and negatively impact electric rates, harming our constituents who are already feeling high energy costs. I urge all members of this committee to support our amendment. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Heinrich.
I would suggest that this is actually going to lower electric rates. It is clear that the power coming onto the grid today is much cheaper than the power being generated by historic thermal generation. And with respect to transmission, the status quo is simply not working. Oftentimes, it requires over a decade to build a very simple power line connecting different parts of the regional grid. And this federal backstop authority is the exact same authority that exists for natural gas pipelines. That no one on this committee is suggesting that we repeal.
Can I ask a question on that, Mr. Chair?
Senator Cassidy.
My understanding is that the state of New York, for example, has been able to stop natural gas pipelines going through the state of New York. So it would suggest to me if this is the same authority as it pertains to natural gas pipelines, it's pretty toothless. So is the law exactly the same for, I don't quite follow. Is it exactly the same as is being used for natural gas pipelines? In which case, it doesn't seem to work very well because we've not been able to get gas to the New England states because Cuomo doesn't want them to go through New York.
I would just say that it is the same authority. There are examples where that Ferc has oftentimes deferred to local considerations. So I think that the picture that has been painted is that Ferc is always going to override local opposition, and they simply don't.
My understanding from the administration last time, if I may interrupt,
Yep,
I apologize,
sure.
is that they were unable to overcome New England's objections. And so that and there may be somebody here who knows something about this more than I, because it's just conversations I had a year or two ago, and that they were unable to override. I'm getting the sense from Senator Marshall that under this amendment, absolutely they could override. Can somebody provide clarity on that?
Yes. This amendment, as I'm understanding, it strikes 1005. It's only about transmission. It's not about pipelines.
But my point being is that the previous administration was unable to override New York State's objections to pipelines. And Senator Heinrich is saying this is exactly the same authority.
Section 105 revises the criteria DOE uses to select and designate national interest electric transmission corridors.
So is Senator Marshall right that this would give them the ability to completely override a state decision? Because we can't do that on pipelines.
Well, basically, where there's national interest for electric transmission, yes, because it's vital.
So it seems to be an authority which would be considered stronger in the case of what Senator Marshall's speaking of than in the case of a pipeline.
I think the reality is that the Ferc has chosen not to.
That's not my understanding on the pipelines.
This is only through national interest corridors. Only national interest corridors can this be done. So, any other?
Yeah, I'm going to support Marshall number 39. This amendment would strike section 1005 of the bill. You know, as I mentioned in my opening statements, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners strongly opposes section 1005. The section would allow the federal government to override state decisions on siting interstate electric transmission facilities. Well, I'm open to strengthening federal authority in this area. It's not the time to make that change in the law. So I think that section 1005 is too significant of a change to make without further deliberation. I had mentioned in the opening statement having hearings on that topic so we could actually get to the kind of the clarifications that Senator Cassidy is asking about. So I would urge our members to support Marshal 39.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make one more comment?
Yes.
Yeah. Certainly, farming around a buried pipeline is a lot different than farming around huge turbines across your farmland. So it is really considering apples and oranges. And though I respect that theoretically it would drive down the cost of utilities, that's not been our experience in Kansas. Kansans are disproportionately carrying the burden of the electricity that's ending up out of state. You know, somehow, some way, they're disproportionately impacting us with building the infrastructure and then transporting it. So I share the same goal. I want to drive down the cost of utilities, but for some reason, it's not working right now. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator King.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Number one, does this provision, perhaps council can answer this, does this provision allow the FERC to override a explicitly negative decision of a state regulatory body?
Yes, Senator, it does. The authority that we're talking about was initially added to the Federal Power Act in 2005, and it was unclear whether a state could be overridden if it denied a permit application or only if it failed to act on that application. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission took the view that it did have the authority to override a state if it denied an application. The Fourth Circuit held that that was not the case, and as a result, the law that was enacted in 2005 has never been used effectively since then.
And I can speak to the intent of that because both New Mexico senators were involved in that legislation at the time on this committee, and the intent was that the FERC would be able to override those decisions, but would also choose whether or not that was in the national interest.
Yes, and it's probably worth pointing out, as Senator Manchin did a moment ago, that this authority would be used in the national interest corridors, which are designated by the Department of Energy. And I think to answer Senator Cassidy's concern about the gas pipeline, I think the reason that those gas pipelines, which were approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, were not built was because states have other environmental permitting authority under the Clean Water Act, for example, that has been used in some cases to block pipelines. And I don't believe that Section 216 of the Federal Power Act gives the Commission any greater authority to override other state laws than the Natural Gas Act does.
Mr. Chairman, my state's lived through this directly. There was a large wind project in the panhandle of my state that was going to send wind power to the Tennessee Valley Authority. There's a state called Arkansas that's in between us, and the high power, high voltage lines, which were the really large lines that were needed to be able to carry it. You're talking the tallest towers and everything. Northwest Arkansas did not want those passing through their state. And though Tennessee Valley Authority in Oklahoma had agreed to do it, Arkansas did not allow it because they didn't want that massive amount of tree clearing to go right through Northwest Arkansas. And so the project did not happen because Arkansas didn't want to see that amount of tree clearing happen across their state to carry power across it. So while we sell power to Arkansas, they didn't want to see it go across them and do that much environmental damage in the process. So it was blocked and it didn't happen. So we've actually been on the other side of this to be able to see it. I respect Arkansas and the decision that they made in that process, and I can understand why they didn't want to have those high power lines to be able to go across. But this would have changed that Arkansas would have said, too bad, the federal government says you got to clear all those trees, clear all that land. There's a line going across you.
That was designated as a national interest electric transmission corridor, was it?
It was going to Tennessee Valley Authority to be able to distribute. So I don't know the exact designation on it, but I do know the state actually blocked it.
Senator, if I may clarify that point. The clean line, I believe it was called, that Senator Lankford is referring to, did not make use of Section 216, which would be available to private utilities. The clean line took advantage of another provision in the Energy Policy Act, Section 1222 or something like that, that enabled the Department of Energy to enter into arrangements with private utilities and exercise federal eminent domain to build those lines. That was contested in court. The court did not ultimately resolve the question of the use of eminent domain, but it denied a preliminary injunction against the line. But nonetheless, because TVA backed out of the deal, the project was never completed.
Any other comments? I would only say during our hearing on the legislation a few weeks ago, we had a robust conversation about this, about the challenges to developing transmission and the difficulties that poses to meeting our energy needs and goals across our country. Congress acknowledged the difficulty in 2005 when it first created DOE and Ferc authority contemplated here, but we've had the current system in place for 15 years, and we know it's not working. We know it's not working. Section 1005 makes incremental progress in addressing some of the challenges facing development of transmission, specifically in these national interest corridors. So for that reason, I would urge my colleagues to vote yes on this. I mean, vote no on this amendment, I'm sorry. Or yes. With that, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. No. All those signify by saying no. Opposed? Well, it does fail on a tie. With that, the amendment fails. With that,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, since we're on this issue, I'd like to offer and withdraw amendment number 7, which deals with
Title I. You on Title I?
Yes.
Okay.
Before we
speak to that?
Yeah, I had a suspicion you were about to move on to Title II, so I wanted to move quickly.
You're quick enough.
And I think it is one of my staff just passed along that just on June 29th, the Supreme Court overruled New Jersey's attempt to stop the Penn East pipeline. Okay. So not a transmission line, but in other words, that pipeline is going to go across New Jersey. I also think that it's worth pointing out that the gas siting authority clearly works. We've got rough justice, 2 million miles of gas pipelines nationwide, but only 1/10 of that for transmission, for high voltage transmission. And I think if we're going to seriously address climate, we're going to have to find some way to get these transmission lines, create the regulatory authority by which we don't spend a fortune every time we want to move energy from one part of the country to another. And we are going to have these important corridors that are going to be vital to our ability to respond and address the climate issue. And if not here, and maybe on the floor or at some point, we can sit down and talk about what kind of changes do we need to make so that we can not bog ourselves down in endless red tape and litigation. If you look at what those authorities that allowed pipelines to be utilized, how rapidly that accelerated the shale gas innovations, we should be able to do the same by facilitating the permitting of transmission lines as well. We need that same level of innovation. So anyway, I wasn't aware that you had such a thing that you could offer and withdraw an amendment, but I have hereby done so.
We're very appreciative. With that, we're going to move to consideration of, I'm sorry, Senator, Title I?
Yes.
Title I, oh, sorry, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer Cantwell number 48. As many of my colleagues know, the Pacific Northwest, the Bonneville Power Administration provides roughly half of the consumed power in our region from a variety of sources, hydro and clean sources, and it's continuing to move towards new transmission. We're very excited about new nuclear transmission coming, new nuclear power coming to the region. But just like every other grid, The lack of transmission capacity causes interconnection queues. Consumers are constrained. Basically, it costs us vulnerability to extreme weather, as my colleague Senator Wyden just described. Blackouts that we had in Spokane just because of high temperatures. And we've heard from expert witnesses in this committee that these are happening with increased frequency. So as the President has encouraged us to make big investments in transmission, I feel our bill is very modest in this regard. One thing that can happen, though, is that we can increase the BPA borrowing authority. BPA borrowing authority, unlike most utilities, has a statutory cap on existing and remaining authority. Given the existing capital demands, BPA investment in transmission and hydroelectric and other assets, BPA currently has significant capital deficits. So the underlying bill, Section 1011, only has $2 billion increase in BPA borrowing authority. I think part of the issue is that there's a discussion with the larger bipartisan group about what is the total amount of a package. And in this case, BPA borrowing authority does not result in any net cost to the taxpayer. All BPA expenditures are fully repaid with interest by BPA customers. Let me repeat that. This provision will greatly boost the reliability and resiliency of the Northwest grid and help us meet the net zero goals moving forward without making taxpayers pay. So I think it's a pretty good deal, and I would encourage my colleagues to support it.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Daines.
Chairman, I want to speak in support of Senator Cantwell's amendment. I was on the call yesterday with Administrator Harrison of BPA. This is an issue for the Northwest senators primarily, and I believe it is the right thing to expand that borrowing authority. And just as Senator Cantwell said, that money is paid back with interest. So I support the amendment.
Further discussion? If not, the question is on the adoption of amendment number 48 by Senator Cantwell. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Amendment passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lankford.
I want to be able to call up Lankford Amendment 113. This strikes Section 1007 of the bill. This is the anchor tenant portion that's in the bill. The anchor tenant portion creates a new program that basically says the federal government in a new project that can come in can actually own 50% of the power that's coming out of it, and they have that capacity to be able to do it. So they step in as quote-unquote the anchor tenant to be able to get preferred projects. This is a pretty dramatic shift from our regional transmission organizations that typically decide how we're going to do power, how we're going to distribute it. It puts centralized federal government trying to decide this large power piece that we have not done in the past, nor do I think it's a very efficient way to be able to do it. It also is going to switch from Republican to Democrat presidents and administrations, suddenly which one's a preferred power project to be able to do, and it's going to bounce capital around. The biggest challenge is going to be, as all of us know, it's a tremendous amount of capital to actually put into doing one of these projects. If it's suddenly you've got to wait until your party is in power to be able to actually go get the next project, this is going to make it just extremely inefficient. So while I understand that we need to be able to get transmission lines, we've got to be able to get it more efficiently. I don't think this is the best solution to it. We've had, by the way, very good conversation on permitting. I hope we can turn all the cameras off and to be able to sit down and be able to actually talk through some of the permitting issues in the days ahead and trying to figure out how to be able to solve some of these issues, because I think it is solvable. I just don't think this is the right solution to give the federal government 50% of the ownership of a transmission system and to have preferred systems depending on which administration's actually in control. So for that, I'd ask for this section to be deleted.
Comments? Let me just say on this, I'm committed to finding ways also to facilitate development of electric transmission, which we're finding very difficult to do across our country as it's needed. And this section provides, for the first time, provides DOE with important tools to accomplish this goal. So for that reason, I do not support this amendment, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Brasso.
After
Senator Murkowski.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that you've committed to working on this. This is something that we have been working with your team on. As people may know, in Alaska, we're not part of anybody's grid, and so the concept of microgrids and how we're able to facilitate these projects, these isolated microgrids, and how we can help tie them into existing transmission, whether it's transportation or telecommunication infrastructure. This is something that we've been trying to figure this out, looking at this section 1007. We think it has the potential to provide for some assistance in this area. So I'm exploring, trying to work with the committee here to help facilitate this, and certainly be happy to work with you, Senator Lankford, understand where you're coming from. But again, we're trying to figure out how we can deal with some of our more isolated situations. So I am, at this point in time, I'm not prepared to support the motion to strike for that reason. But I would hope that we would all agree that this is something worth working on.
Mr. Chairman, I am planning to support Lankford 113. Section 1007 would allow the federal government to buy electric transmission capacity. To me, and experts have informed all of us that this section would drive private investment out of the electric transmission sector. It would enable the administration to pick winners and losers when it comes to electric generation, and I think it's ripe for waste and abuse and fraud, and I think it should be struck from the bill, and I urge members to support Lankford 113.
The question is on adoption of amendment number 113 by Senator Lankford. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those in favor, all those opposed? No? No. The noes appear to have it.
You voted both ways.
No. The noes appear to have it. Noes do have it. Amendment fails.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to call
Lee.
Lee Amendment number 155.
Title 1?
Yes.
Senator Lee.
So the Stafford Act provides hazard mitigation assistance to help reduce the risk of future damage, hardship, loss, or suffering in areas affected by wildfires and windstorms. Section 1002 of the Energy Infrastructure Act would amend this section of the Stafford Act to allow for mitigation assistance to fund the undergrounding of wires. To ensure that the undergrounding of wires is a realistic option and one that can be deployed quickly and in a cost-efficient manner, the amendment that I'm proposing, number 155, would expedite the review of directional drilling, which is often used when undergrounding wires. Specifically, directional drilling is a steerable, it's a steerable trenchless method of installing underground pipe, conduit, or cable in a shallow arc along a prescribed bore path by using a surface-launched drilling rig with minimal impact on the surrounding area. So my amendment would create a categorical exclusion for directional drilling specifically for the undergrounding of wires in order to expedite the analysis required under the National Environmental Policy Act. I encourage my colleagues to support it.
Any comments? I think we should hold off on adding new NEPA categorical exclusions to the bill unless there's a compelling need to do so. The federal agencies already have authority to create their own categorical exclusions. To my knowledge, the committee has not received any request from the Department of Interior or the Forest Service that they need a new categorical exclusion for undergrounding wires. I don't believe there's a demonstrated compelling need for this categorical exclusion, and I will oppose this amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
I understand your point about wanting to find a compelling need, and I can identify one for you right off the bat. If you need to see it, I'd encourage you to visit any part of the western United States. We're in a severe historic drought. Severe historic drought coupled with multiple years of drought, coupled with years of neglect in terms of reduction of fuel sources, has produced an absolutely devastating risk of wildfires. So when we're going through processes like these, this is a matter of public safety. of health and public safety. It's a relatively narrow issue, but an issue that could make a big difference in terms of preventing wildfires.
Any other discussion? If not, the question is on the adoption of amendment number 155 from Senator Lee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. There appears to be a tie. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kelly.
Yeah, I'd like to call up Kelly Amendment number 15 to Title I on tribal energy development. Mr. Chairman, my amendment would revise the Department of Energy's tribal loan guarantee program. So tribes are not getting the assistance that they need from the federal government to develop their energy potential. This is particularly true in Arizona, where tribes have enormous solar energy potential. But as I look around this committee room, many of the members have tribes in their communities, and it's probably true for them as well. Not one DOE tribal loan has been issued in our state or anywhere else since the program was created in 2005. This amendment is tech neutral and is supported by the National Congress of American Indians. And this amendment, Mr. Chairman, would allow tribes to use existing DOE grants to pair with loan guarantees, support workforce development, and assist in the planning and design of tribal energy projects. It also creates a tribal preference for federal agencies' purchasing power. And tribal energy projects can more easily partner with non-tribal entities when utilizing DOE support. Additionally, tribes can choose to accelerate infrastructure sitting across tribal lands. I think this would appeal to many of the members on the other side of the aisle. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to see this amendment adopted by voice vote if possible.
Senator Kelly, any other discussions? Senator Lankford, Senator Heinrich. Oh, Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Senator Kelly's focus on what is happening with tribal energy development. We worked really hard, I think, to get the Office of Indian Energy within DOE functioning better, I think is probably the phrase that I will use for it. I do think that there are more opportunities that we can be doing in this space. We've been working with Senator Kelly's team as well as folks here on the committee with regards to some of the proposals within this amendment. I think that there's still some vetting that needs to go on here. And as this bill moves forward, I'd offer to continue to work with you on these to make sure that, again, when we're talking about tribal energy and the provisions that would be within an infrastructure bill, we want to make sure that we're helping to facilitate it, but we want to make sure that we're doing it right.
Mr. Chairman, well.
Senator Heinrich?
I just want to speak in favor of the amendment and encourage the continued dialogue. The status quo is woefully inadequate. I think most of us with tribal communities in our states have experienced the fact that there just is not a functional path within DOE to access those loan programs right now effectively. And as you've heard, there hasn't been a single loan as a result of that. And we urge it to, we owe it to our tribal communities to offer up the same opportunities that exist everywhere else in the United States. The loan program writ large is really cranking right now. I spoke to the current director of the loan office last night, and we're making a lot of progress on a lot of these energy projects, but with respect to development in tribal communities, it has been woefully unsuccessful, and the status quo has got to change.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Daines.
So I have interest in working with you, Senator Kelly, on this. We have tribes, in fact, in Montana, the Crow, it's actually coal. It may be solar down in Arizona. But we haven't had a chance to get the feedback yet from the tribe. I think this came in fairly late in the process. And I just like to vet it more and work with you on that. I'm not in a position to say yes at the moment, but I tell you, I'd work with you on it very sincerely here and try to get this in the package at some point if we can. But it's a little bit early. I'd like to engage our tribes a bit more as we just got the text here recently.
Mr. Chairman, so Senator Murkowski, Senator Daines, I appreciate your willingness to work with me on this to benefit the tribes in all of our states. And Senator Heinrich, thank you for the support here. But based on that, I look forward to working with you, and I'd like to withdraw the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Motion is withdrawn. Amendment's withdrawn.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator
We're
Cantwell.
still on Title I.
Title I.
Are
We're
you
still on
about to
Title I.
move off of Title I? I would offer Cantwell 50 as modified. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Risch. He and I have been working, well, with many of our colleagues from the Pacific Northwest on what is the Columbia River Treaty, a treaty between the United States and Canada, and obviously in efforts to continue to help the Pacific Northwest and growers and irrigators. Currently, there's an imbalance between the U.S. and our northern neighbors. Much of the water that flows through the mighty Columbia starts in Canada, but way too much of the electricity generated in the United States is then gifted back to British Columbia, costing regional ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars a year. This amendment would create a number of initiatives to improve transmission between Canada and the western and southwest United States in order to increase on-demand and clean electricity supplies. This amendment improves the energy storing capacity and water management between the Columbia River Basin to benefit local farmers, ratepayers, and improve flood control.
Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I just don't see a justification to increase the authorization by $100 million at this point, so I'm going to have to oppose the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
This amendment would give the Pacific Northwest stakeholders and the State Department some important tools to improve the Columbia River Treaty, which I know is central to the region's hydropower-based economy. I support this amendment and urge my colleagues to support it for these reasons. With that, the question is on adoption of amendment number 50 by Senator Cantwell. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. There appears to be a tie.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a roll call.
Roll call.
Senator Manchin.
Aye.
Senator Wyden.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Cantwell.
Aye.
Senator Sanders.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Heinrich.
Aye.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you.
Senator King. Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Kelly. Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Brasso.
No.
Senator Risch.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Lee.
No.
Senator Daines.
Aye.
Senator Murkowski. Senator Hoven.
They didn't speak up.
Senator Lankford. Senator Cassidy.
No by proxy.
Senator Hyde-Smith. Yes. Senator Marshall. On this vote, the ayes are 13, the noes are 7, so the amendment is agreed to.
Amendment is agreed to.
Senator, may I just clarify? There was some confusion when we first went into the tie by voice vote. Did that apply to Senator Hirono's amendment as well, after you had initially believed it was an aye vote?
Pardon me?
What was the final disposition of Senator Hirono's amendment?
There was a tie.
That was
a tie. Yeah.
Okay. There was some confusion back here. I just needed to clarify that for the record. Thank you.
Sometimes I don't hear the yeses or nos as clearly as I should. The only thing we're trying to do is for the sake of time, if we can call it that way. If anyone has it, I'm glad that Senator Cantwell called it, because I didn't hear any yeses from this side. I want to make sure she called it, she knew. worked out well, that's fine. So whenever you have a doubt or concern, please call it. Any other Title I? Any Title I amendments? Going once, twice? Title I's done. Title II amendments.